Good evening and welcome to this special edition of CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar and the Barbadian society, sponsored by the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados and the Barbados Childhood Obesity Prevention Coalition. I am your host, Kenneth Connell. I am chairman of the Campus Health and Wellness Committee, an internist, and a QEH consultant in the Department of Medicine. More importantly for you, though, are my hosts, my guests. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Dr. Justin Ram, International Economist, and Dr. the Honorable Sonia Browne, Minister of State in the Ministry of Health and Wellness with specific responsibility for non-communicable diseases and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I encourage you to send us your comments and questions on WhatsApp at 228-5562. And we also have a poll taking place, and you can text the word health to 832-6775. We will be back with a spicy but unsweetened conversation right after our break. Welcome back. Remember to WhatsApp us at 228-5562. So let's just get straight into the meat of the matter and begin by speaking about sugar and the enormous burden it has on non-communicable diseases in Barbados. And I'm going to introduce a graphic onto our screen, but also share with the audience some data. The NCDs are killing us, and they're killing us at an early age. NCDs are now responsible for 8 out of 10 deaths in Barbados. And by 2015, cancer was the second leading cause of death in this country. But if those data are not alarming, let me share some others related to hospital admissions. So 547 heart attacks were admitted to the hospital in 2019 with a death rate of about 25%. And this was coupled by 758 strokes all in 1 year, and a mortality rate of 37%. Now, there isn't a daily dashboard introducing all these numbers, for instance, like in a pandemic, but certainly the disease burden is significant. And so, Prof, I want to start with you by introducing this graphic on the screen, which shows the amount of sugar that we are consuming in several beverages. So if you look onto the screen, you can see from one end, which is water, 0 sugar added, to the other end, another product which has 40 grams of sugar per can of that product. This did not happen by coincidence. Sugar is described in our society as cultural. Sugar made us free. Can you paint the picture for us, the historical landscape that could have led to this obsession with sugar?
Well, certainly I can. But first, let me say that, well, you know, as you would know, physicians have known about this disease for hundreds of years, if not over 1,000 years. They've known about this condition affecting humans. And by the time of the rise of the Caribbean sugar industry in the 17th and 18th centuries, this disease was better understood, and therefore there was a much better understanding of what was actually causing this disease. So there was an explosion of scientific understanding of the disease at the same time that the sugar industry was exploding around the world. So Barbados was one of the major global centers of the explosion of the sugar industry, where sugar became culture. It became the economy, the society. Everything was based on sugar. Status, wealth, well-being, everything in the society in Barbados was built on sugar. And the result of that is that the majority of the people on the island was brought here to make sugar. And by virtue of how that sugar industry was established, the vast majority of the 600,000 Africans who were brought to Barbados to reap the cane, they were forced to consume what they produce. And since the only significant production was sugar, this is what they consume in large quantities. And so we have this coincidence where in the historical record, we are having two narratives. One, a better understanding of the disease, but also the records of the plantations are now being littered by the 18th and 19th century with this concept of sugar. These black people have sugar, and they have wounds that will not heal. And there is this constant referencing through the slave plantations about sugar, and people having this condition. So, you know, by the end of the slavery period, the vast majority of black people in Barbados were addicted to sugar. I mean, I don't think addiction is the word that you use, but it's
obsession.
The word that I am going to
yes.
use. I'm going to use addiction, because if you are consuming something every single day as part of your lifestyle, and if you're also smart enough to know that it's not doing you any good, but you cannot keep away from it. You cannot keep away from it largely because of a scarcity of other quality foods, but this is what you are actually consuming as your everyday product. You might have a view that this is not good, but you cannot help yourself. You cannot help increasing your consumption as part of your everyday life. And this is really what happened to black people in Barbados. A whole society of people trapped on sugar plantations, trapped in a culture of consume what you produce, and then being addicted by intergeneration addiction to the sweetness of this product and in all of its manifestations. So I have no doubt, my friend, that as a society we are an addicted nation to sugar, and it's not as a result of any particular weakness or cultural propensity. It has to do with the economics of production, the economics of consumption. It has to do with political power and who were forced to eat what and who could not vary their diet significantly. We were driven into and trapped in a sugar production routine. That is why I say that intergenerational addiction, and someone should be held accountable. We have to explain this in terms of accountability, not an act of God. It was deliberately done over multiple generations, over 200-300 years.
I'm going to bring you back to the accountability part, but you know, you've raised an interesting point about intergenerational addiction, and that's interesting because infant food to the adult, you know, tastes horrible. There's no added sugar. It is not palatable. We don't like it. The kind of food that babies consume really is not something that we would imagine that we would sit and enjoy, and yet babies enjoy it because the palate has not been altered at all with all of the added sugar. And before I move to Dr. Browne, there is a cultural element that occurs. For instance, if you fall and you hit your knee, the first thing your grandmother is going to tell you, let me mix some sugar water and give you to help with that so that you don't get to scatter any bruised blood. So there is this post-colonial legacy and obsession, addiction, whatever we want to call it, with sugar. And I want to move to the next slide looking at what shows the WHO packages to bring it up for Dr. Browne to comment on. WHO policies obviously is meant to prevent this tsunami of sugar that's attacking us or that we are consuming. And it says simply three things: restrict the sale and advertising of unhealthy food and beverages in and around schools across Barbados. Introduce and increase the tax of sugar-sweetened beverages to effect a 20% increase in the price of sugar-sweetened beverages. And we saw this on April 1st this year here. And of course, very important as well, front of package warning labels. So Dr. Browne, I guess my opening shot to you would be, does government have a role to play in the anti-sugar policy, in bringing about the decreased consumption of sugar? And if so, what role does government have to play?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me on the program. And the answer to that, in short, is of course the government has a role to play with respect to the decrease in consumption of sugar within the population. We have come to a stage, as you mentioned before, that NCDs has more or less taken over from everything else in the healthcare system. They account for $375 million, I think, annually on the spend of government for healthcare. The government has noticed, and this is before this government, that we need to take steps to see that we can curb this trend that we are seeing with increased NCDs, with the increased intake of sugar. We have one of the highest sweetened beverages intake around the globe. And I think it is a timely manner, maybe sometimes a bit late, a timely manner that the government should take hold of this process, which we have done. You saw recently that the Prime Minister instituted and the Parliament so far instituted a tax of a further 10% on the already existing 10% on sweetened sugar sweetened beverages. So it's now at 20% tax to the manufacturers and the consumers. This is a good step in the right direction to ensure that we take the NCD issue, the obesity, the cancers, hypertension, the whole gamut of them more seriously. And I am new to the ministry, but over the last few couple months, and dare say I know the Ministry of Health has been working assiduously and hard to get the message across that a low sugar diet, low salt diet is where Barbadians need to take it, and indeed the rest of the Caribbean. So yes, the government has a role, and we're seeing that it is happening right now.
Thank you, Dr. Browne. And finally, Dr. Ram, I am not an economist, but looking at this slide, there seems to have been an impact of the 10% imposition on sugar-sweetened beverages, which is now 20%. You saw an increase in the price of SSBs by 5.9%. The sale of SSBs decreased by 4.3%. It had very little impact on demand by children and young adults, and we can discuss that. The sale of non-SSBs increased by 5.2%. And of course, the sale of bottled water increased by 7.5%. Talk about these data. And I also want to mention one term that has been out there mentioned by many economists. How do you bring about the balance in taxation, the so-called revenue neutrality?
Yes. Okay, well, pleasant good evening to you and audience members and other members of the panel. Thanks for having me tonight. So I think that data shows that the original tax of 10% did have some impact, but certainly not at the level that we would like to see. I guess there was a small reduction in the consumption of SSBs. What was good was that it actually led to some substitution effects, whereby individuals also then started to buy other non-SSB type drinks, and including that increase in water consumption, which can only be a good thing. So that's good. As it relates to young people and young children still consuming, I think that's something that we're going to have to work on, because certainly at a young age, you do think that you are not as vulnerable to disease as when you get older. So of course you of course think that you can consume anything and you won't have significant health impacts. So that certainly is one aspect. But as you mentioned, the topic of revenue neutrality, I think that that's a very important point that perhaps the policymakers need to take note of, and to of course help with making this particular policy a lot more palatable to the general population. What does revenue neutrality mean? It means that if we are increasing taxes in one area, then what we should really attempt to do is reduce taxes in other areas where we want to encourage consumption, for example. So
Dr. Ram, I'm
overall,
going to interrupt you there and to a break. But first, I want to remind our listeners to WhatsApp in your questions at 228-5562, or you can send them to the poll as well. Your comments or questions to take the poll, and go take a water break, but be right back. We will be right back on CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar and the Barbadian society. Welcome back to CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar and the Barbadian society. Before you went to a water break, we left Dr. Ram speaking about revenue neutrality, and I am curious because it's completely outside of my lexicon. What is revenue neutrality?
okay, thanks. So I was explaining that revenue neutrality really means that when the government introduces a new tax, it should really attempt to reduce taxes in other parts of the economy so that the overall revenue to the government is neutral, and so that there's not an increase. And I think that there's a real case in this instance for revenue neutrality for the government, because it has now increased the tax on SSBs, to perhaps attempt to reduce taxes in other parts of the economy. And I think specifically here to lower taxes in areas where we want to encourage consumption of much more healthy products. One thing I would also say as well, with this overall tax, there's probably also a good reason for us to consider sort of ring fencing this revenue and using the revenue perhaps to support maybe agriculture production, let's say here in Barbados, to produce the type of products that we think that we could be producing. And maybe just initially providing some subsidies to get that going, so that we get the type of healthy products being produced locally, so that we have an overall win-win situation with this as well.
Thank you. Yes. So I like that point, the last point that you've made, and I guess it kind of sides into an earlier one of the questions we have in the poll, and that is, you know, what would you do? What would the main intervention you would carry out? And that is in terms of making cheap and affordable fruits and vegetables or products available, taxation, a whole list of options, and we'll see what the results are at the end of the show. But Sir Hilary, when you finished your comment, you made a very interesting kind of statement. You said that it's transgenerational. We had this obsession. No, obsession was my turn. Addiction was your turn. And it might have had to do with our whole period of enslavement. Now, let me situate this in the middle of a pandemic, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, where you have a black society where there's a high NCD burden, and who are the people who do worse in a pandemic? Those people who have NCDs, high blood pressure and high blood sugar, right? So the question I'm asking you is, could this post-colonial legacy be putting us at risk, not just in this pandemic, but for future pandemics? And if so, what is the cost?
Well, thank you, Ken. The reason I try to, or I would like to shift the conversation from obsession to addiction is because if you are speaking about obsession and you want to regulate consumption, as we have said, through the market by increasing prices and really trying to create a concept of reduced consumption through price regulation, price hikes, and taxations, and so on, then you go in one direction. But if you go in the direction I would prefer, which is an addiction theory, an intergenerational addiction theory, then you're looking at a public health crisis. And I am saying that this is really a public health, an existential threat to the population, to the people. It is an existential public health threat, and it is not sustainable. So clearly, I'm suggesting that we need to see this really in terms of public health, psychological health, physical health, and look for a cure for this addiction. Now, I remember one of the things that I am almost ashamed of, Ken, was I remember 50 years ago or so when I got the results of my common entrance, and my dearly loved grandmother gave me 25 cents as a gift. And living in rural Barbados in deep poverty, probably the most in-depth poverty you can imagine, I ran to the village shop with my 25 cents, and I didn't walk, I ran. And when I got there, I bought a red soda, and I gulped it down, and then I didn't feel satisfied, and I bought an orange one, and I gulped down 2 sodas with my 25 cents gift. And I remember that today because I was ashamed of myself then, and I'm ashamed of myself now. And I thought, why did I do that? Now, here I am now, I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, and I've seen the same behavior in young people, the same behavior I had 50 years ago. I now see children, grandchildren, and so on. And it is an addiction. And the historical evidence, I think, speaks to the addiction because, I mean, I don't know how many of you would know this, but certainly in the class of people I came from, we ate sugar as a meal. It wasn't just sweet drinks and sweet foods. We actually ate sugar as part of the poverty alleviation, the hunger to kill the pang of hunger. We would eat sugar. Some kids went to school with a little satchel of sugar, and they would eat it when they were gripped by hunger. So we have a relationship to sugar that is unique in the world. Though I must say that some of my colleagues, for example, in the Windward Islands, have told me that what their parents would do in hunger, they would take sugar and they would soak the satchel of sugar in water. And when the babies cry, they would squeeze the sugar water into the baby's mouth, and babies, little babies, months old, and they start the process of addiction by squeezing this sugar water into the mouths of crying babies, and that takes us all through for the rest of our lives. It's a peculiar Caribbean culture, it's a significant Barbados Caribbean culture. And once we understand the history of this, and then you have the record, 300 years of sugar, wounds that will not heal, working people being diagnosed with sugar, plantations carrying large numbers of slaves, and even after slavery with sugar. So when you historicize this, you come to realize it is much more than today. It is much more than this notion that there has been a shift in behavioral patterns, a shift in consumption, a shift towards salty and sugary foods, and now we have this explosion of diabetes that is a result of recent history. I am saying no, this goes back 400 years in our history. We see the trail of it.
Yeah, no, that you're absolutely correct. And so who addresses this? Of course, Dr. Browne, both you and I know this very well. We sit in our offices. Well, maybe you don't sit in your office as often now, but we sit in our offices. We try to counsel patients about changing their lifestyle, right? And we don't always do a very good job at it because lifestyle changes are quite hard to enact. But government has a responsibility of changing the health environment. I've used this example before by saying when I lived in another country, a much colder country, everyone in Tesco had a bottle of water. I felt so guilty holding a bottle of Jamaican ginger beer that I converted to water. So I guess I'm asking you, what other policies do you see government as being or should be held accountable to enacting besides just a sugar sweetened beverage tax?
Okay, the other policies, yes, and of course I support the sugar sweetened beverage tax. But we need to look at, for instance, the school nutrition policy, which is in the works right now, being discussed and so on, whereby we have some measure of control over the marketing to children with respect to not even high sugar foods, but also high salt foods, high fat foods, marketing of sugar in schools. We have to look at things like, for instance, into school sports, other sporting events are often sponsored by companies that use that to advertise their products, which in event are usually sugary or salty products. So these are some of the things we're looking at as well. The education always comes with that. There are different things on board that were there before I came. National Task Force on Wellness, Heart and Stroke Foundation, on which you sit.
The NCD Commission.
The focus now is on education of the public. We need to get that on the school curricula, and that is on the table as well on the school curricula for both primary and secondary schools. So these are some of the issues. So while the attack from the naysayers is on the sugar sweetened beverages, and I cannot help but agree with them that there are other aspects in the diet that play a role in this, we have to start somewhere. My only regret is that the 20% tax will not translate as a 20% tax to the consumer, as you would have seen with the 10% tax. How it only translated to 4% in terms of increased cost to the consumer.
To the consumer.
But we have to start somewhere. We expect pushback from the manufacturers on the basis that, and I've heard it recently, that it is too costly to adjust the what's the word, recipe, so to speak, formulations of the product is too costly. Every excuse, but they had time from way back when we had the 10% tax to make these adjustments. And they keep saying this, and while they see a decrease in their profits in the short run, which I'm not certain that it happened significantly, while they see a decrease in their profits in the short term, in the long term, we all benefit from it. So the message really is to get this across to the public. There are other things coming, but we have to start somewhere. We have to start with diet. We have to start with exercise. And you see the Ministry of Health has been proactive in terms of we just had joined the Defense Force with respect to the walk and so on, the Sneaker Fridays. There are things that are coming incrementally that will make an impact, is my hope, make an impact with respect to the basic health of Barbados. And I tend to agree with Professor Beckles here that I too view sugar intake as an addiction. We have, and he speaks of sugar being added, but it's even worse than that. We see mothers adding, and you would have heard this, Kenneth, at some point in time, where they thought glucose water was the food of choice after formula or breastfeeding.
Absolutely. Yes.
We need to get the message across even before birth. And they
Mm-hmm.
repeatedly say this. We need to get the message across to the antenatal people, the mothers who are expecting babies. We need to get the message from the beginning right up until the end. So the Ministry of Health, yes, we've made great strides in this, but there are other things that we have on board, and there are other ideas out there. I listen, what if I may get the signal from Dr. Ram with respect to the cost savings on other products that may be healthier, but we can even start before then. The main complaint I get on my Facebook page or wherever is that the cost to eat healthy is high. We all know this, but there are things you can do to get that out of the way. There are things you can do. Use seasonal vegetables and fruits. In the short and the medium to long term, encourage gardening. I remember when a previous Prime Minister, when Arthur, the Right Honourable, suggested that we get back to the kitchen
Kitchen
garden, and that
gardens.
was a big hoopla. But
Yes.
the truth is, people, especially since the pandemic did have its pros.
We were all
Started growing
confined
their
to our
own.
curtilage, so we had no
Correct.
choice but to do kitchen gardening.
Yes. So these are some of the things the government is encouraging, the Ministry of Health and the hospital is encouraging the population to seek to get to that point where
Sure.
they say an addiction can never be overcome, but where we can at least settle it in terms of getting new habits arising from the small ones and hopefully up to the older generation.
Well, we're going to break the addiction and also take a break here and allow you to get some water and be right back. Remember to WhatsApp us at 228-5562. WhatsApp your questions in. We will be right back at CBC Presents. So welcome back to CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar and the Barbadian society. I am Kenneth, Connell, your host. So let's move into some of the questions coming from the audience. We had some very interesting questions coming up. Maybe we can have the first one on cue. So I am concerned about the mixed messages coming from the media, not necessarily this broadcasting network, about lowering of our salt intake, reducing our sugar intake, fats, starches, etc. Yet certain fast food establishments are heavily promoting their products. Sounds like a question coming from one of my patients. Dr. Browne, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can try. Mixed messages, as you said before, certainly not on this forum here. But to some extent, I agree. The media has now extended to social media, the usual Facebooks and Instagram. But in my observation, the move seems to be pro NCD control, even though it might be difficult to implement right now in terms for everybody. I think the media here is useful in getting the message out. But when I say that, the media has to take responsibility, and everything comes down to economics and finance. But the media has to take responsibility in terms of what they project to the public. So by my saying that, I mean, for instance, they have to be wary of their ad campaigns in terms of where they get the income, which companies, who is it marketed to. We are trying to steer away from the marketing of sugar sweetened beverages, for instance, to school age children. We need to put a damper with the cooperation of the media, of course, to restrict advertising in that sense of fast food restaurants and the new beverage on the block in terms of the sugar sweetened beverages. I think they can play a part. I am not necessarily saying mixed messages from the media, but in that sense, this is how I interpret it, that the ad campaign for sugar sweetened beverages and fatty foods and salty foods is alive and well. And I think the media needs to play a part in the control of these messages.
Sure, thank you.
I
And
can't remember the message, the question.
no, it was basically mixed messages about what's good for you and what's not good for you, you know, and I think that it can be very confusing. Of course, one thing that helps to bring clarity is really front of package labeling, so there are easy warning signs on these food packages. It's easy to calculate whether something is above your daily, you know, intake for sodium or something else. We have another question
Yes.
here. How do we navigate the messy situation that relates to Barbados being termed the amputee capital of the world? Let me just add here, Dr. Browne, before you jump in, we're not probably only the amputee capital of the world, but we have a very high prevalence of heart failure. The reason why, when many people go to the hospital, there's a long wait in the emergency room is because of the number of cardiovascular complications coming to our one tertiary institution. And the number one admission to medicine in adult medicine is heart failure. These are largely driven by high blood pressure and high blood sugar. So we are not just the amputee capital, we are the NCD capital and the NCD burden. Any comments from anyone on the panel on that?
Well, I would say, Doc, well, first of all, I should have said what a tremendous pleasure it is being in the company of Dr. Browne and Dr. Ram, because I believe that such a conversation between historians, medics and economists is a good conversation. And I will say this. I've seen some staggering figures in relation to our identity, that half of the people in our island, half the people in our island who are over the age of 60, either diabetic or hypertension or both, which would mean that if you take that description, using hypertension, diabetes as a marker, it would mean that we Barbadians are probably the sickest people in the world. Because I don't think there's another society, you might know, Doc, but I don't think there's another society with as many people in it who are diabetic and hypertensive. So if half of our seniors over the age of 60 are hypertensive, diabetic, that would mean that if you put us on a global scale and you put all the societies together, that would mean that the black people in Barbados are among the sickest people in the world. And if that is so, how did it get like that? We know how it got like that. And I should say to you that I'm very proud that the government has taken this stance, because I wish that we have had governments in the past that look out for our public health in this way. It is heart-rending to me that I'm a citizen in a society, an African citizen in my society, and to know that my cohort is among the sickest people in the world if I use these criteria as a judgment. And this has been historically created. This did not happen overnight. This did not happen 20 years ago when we all became middle class and started to eat refined foods. This was long in the making. It might have accelerated in the last 2 or 3 decades, but this was long in the making. So here we are, free citizens in the newest republic in the world. Mm-hmm. We're so proud of our identity as free people in our society. But when the medics roll out the statistics and show us who we really are, we are a very sick people, and something must be done drastically to turn this around. I don't think it's simply going to be enough to tamper with prices at the consumer point and try to reduce consumption by 10, 15, 20% by adjusting price. I mean, I know Justin is an economist. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know how elastic is the demand for sugary drinks. I don't know how inelastic. But I know those concepts. But what I do know is that we, the citizens, for historical purposes and reasons, we are very sick people. And we are passing that sickness on to our children and our grandchildren. And it's cascading. So it's a public health catastrophe that we Barbadian people are now faced with. It's a public health catastrophe.
If it's a public health catastrophe,
it is our identity, and we have to change this identity.
Then maybe 20% tax is not enough. Justin, what are your comments on that? There is some urgency. There's a burning platform here, literally.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think I have to agree with both Sir Hilary and, of course, Dr. Browne, that this is a health crisis that we need to deal with. And of course, I have to agree with Dr. Browne, and of course with Sir Hilary here, that the tax is a step in the right direction, but it certainly is insufficient. If it is a health crisis, then we need to be doing a lot more. And one of the things we have to look at here is that this health crisis is a significant externality on the rest of society. Spending $375 million per annum on NCDs is unsustainable. And we should really want to put an end to that and allocate those resources to much more productive things. So the taxes, I think, are in the right direction. We do have to consider whether we need to raise that tax further. But I would have to say here that taxation alone will not get us to where we want to be. I agree with Sir Hilary here that it has to be a much more comprehensive approach to this, which requires educating the population from a very early age, encouraging different lifestyle choices, and of course making available other better nutritional meals and drinks available to the average person. Because as we know, with any tax on SSBs, there is a regressive component to this, where it will actually impact low-income households more than higher-income households. And so we have to be mindful of that and try to implement policies as well that will mitigate that particular fallout. That distributional impact has to be looked at fully. So I think it's a good start. Maybe we don't need to necessarily increase taxes more, but we need to look at other policies as well that will help us move in the direction that we want to move in.
So an amazing phenomenon is occurring here. An economist, historian, and medic are all agreeing. There's triangular agreement here. But I wanted to bring you back to front of package labels and front of package warning labels, Dr. Browne, because if you go to the supermarket and these octagonal labels are in your face, you kind of don't have the excuse of saying, well, I didn't really know it was that unhealthy for me, right? What about front of package labeling?
I am all for front of package labeling. And when I say front of package labeling, I mean warning labeling. It's okay to put the contents on the back of a package, but let's be realistic, Kenneth. A lot of people in the population do not know when they read, I'm looking for something to read, when they read X grams of fat is in the product per serving. People can more relate, in my estimation, to a warning label, as I can't remember if you had it in a slide, but a warning label saying high salt, high fat, high sugar, or on the good side, low fat, low sugar, whatever. I think that is something, and of course there's pushback from manufacturers and the wholesalers. That is something that has to be instituted. I don't say it needs to be, it has to be instituted, because as you said, we basically are fearing a NCD pandemic. And I want to put it that way. Yes, COVID has taken a toll on the country, but this is the time now where NCDs need to take a front seat, or at least the second in line after the COVID. You have mentioned before that people with NCDs are more prone to the complications of COVID. We all have come to know that. We've seen the deaths. I wanted to... So I agree with the front of package. And there's one thing I wanted to comment on or clarify from Dr. Ram. You were saying with respect to the lower income households, I'm not sure if I had it correct, that they're the ones that would clarify what you said in terms of the tax.
Yeah, so what I'm saying here is that any tax, and this is normally a general rule of economics, any tax on consumption will tend to have a regressive impact on lower income households, because when you look at the data, perhaps those are the households that are perhaps consuming this product more,
More.
particularly as a percentage of their income. But I should also say that they can also benefit from this, because now they would
Yeah.
likely reduce their health costs, for example, if they are reducing their consumption of SSBs. So I should make that point as well.
Conversation is getting very
Right.
spicy, but we need to go to a break. So I'm going to allow you, the viewers, to go and have some more unsweetened anything, including water is also acceptable. And then we come right back on CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar, the Barbadian society. Welcome back to CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar and the Barbadian society. Let's go to some poll results now. Thank you for participating in our poll, and maybe we can have the results up on screen. So the first question was, do you think Barbadians have an unhealthy obsession, sorry Prof, these were my words, with sugar? Maybe you can say addiction as well. 98% of you said yes. And one person said, well, maybe not so. Next question. If you could choose one, just one intervention to reverse high sugar consumption, what would you choose? Or which one would you choose? 18% of you said public health education. 11% said legislation on taxation on sugar-sweetened beverages, which we already have in place. Banning of SSBs in schools was 9%, and the overwhelming majority, provision of cheaper and healthier foods, 62%. Wow. Question 3. In addition to the efforts aimed at reducing sugar-sweetened beverage consumption, which intervention should government implement urgently? Not next year or 2 years from now, but urgently. Again, taxation to address salt consumption. A quarter of you said that. Provision of healthy choice menus at health centers like the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, 16%. Implementation of a school nutrition policy, 43%. And creating a national plan to increase physical activity, 18%. I guess the task force on wellness would speak to that as well. So Dr. Browne, I want to take back to a point that you said. It was powerful. It stuck in my mind, even with a personal experience. I traveled to Argentina, a long flight, several connections, arrived in my hotel room, and there, almost like in a television ad, fluorescent red coming from my fridge in the room was a red sugar-sweetened beverage that will remain nameless. I took it up because I figured, the cafeteria is closed. This is all that I have. And literally the only thing that stopped me from consuming it was the front of package warning label. I felt so guilty consuming it that I put it back and say, you know what? I'll just wait until breakfast in the morning. Front of package warning labels are significant. But I want to close this segment really by hearing your thoughts on what would be your advice. Dr. Browne, you are part of government, so it won't be your advice to government, but what advice would you like to receive in terms of hot steps or hot action steps to address the sugar attack or the sugar pandemic?
Well, the hot steps I would like to see. I had a look at a part of your poll, what I could get through. And one of the issues here that I saw that people were in favor of, not the majority, were instituting healthy foods within our institutions where the government has control. So the geriatric hospitals, the district hospitals, the public hospital, QEH, all of our children's homes, all our institutions. That is one thing that we can start right away without too much pushback from the manufacturers and the rest of the public. I would like to see that instituted. I would love to see us working as a team within government. When I say as a team, we have to be aware that it takes more than the Ministry of Health to implement change within the population when it comes to NCDs. By saying that, and I've said it before, we need the input, of course, of the Ministry of Education. We need the input, of course, of the Transport and Works. And when I say that, I mean, and sports, of course. We need to make Barbados exercise-friendly, healthy eating-friendly society where it becomes a norm that we eat normally. Front of package labeling, of course, as you mentioned, is extremely important in my view. We expect the pushback there, but it needs to happen. We need to basically force, and I say this without reservation, force the manufacturers of these foods and beverages into reformulation plans. And Dr. Ram came up with the idea of putting it on a strata in terms of the amount of sugar per beverage in terms of taxation. I think that is something that's still open for discussion because the truth is you have some low sugar foods, sugar sweetened foods that will invariably be taxed. Yes, we want to push water, but these are the upfront things I would like to see happen. I would like to see steering away from advertising to children. And when I say children, some companies offer to not advertise up to 12 years old.
Yeah.
But we have seen that the secondary population, the intake of sugar sweetened beverages is also high.
Yeah.
So these are the things I would like to see happening. No.
Dr. Ram, I'm going to give you an opportunity to give me 1 minute closing comments. No.
No.
I think for Barbados, and I think even for the wider Caribbean, we do need a sort of a vision of citizenship. What is that citizenship vision? What do we want for the individual to be able to achieve? And I think that means we need a sort of a renewal of a social contract, which means what is the responsibility of the individual and what is the responsibility of the state? And I think what we're discussing here is really that what things the state needs to put in place to ensure that the citizen can achieve his or her ultimate potential in life. given the great historical injustices that have occurred. I think the time has come for us to do that, and that means, look, the taxes is a step in the right direction, but also I think that we have to look at this in a comprehensive way. How can we support agriculture so that we're starting to produce the types of foods that we can produce home, so that we have a win-win situation here, where we are tackling NCDs, but also helping to produce local production of what is good for us.
Sure. Prof, I'm going to give you the final 30 seconds. Short but not sweet.
Well, my now, according to Dr. Browne, would be this. This criminal culture called the sugar plantation system that has done so much harm to us and has now made us, it has oppressed us, enslaved us, but now it's made us sick. Now we are sick as a result of this sugar addiction. I would like to see those sugar plantations turn into food plantations. Overnight, an aggressive, radical transformational policy. Turn all of those sugar plantations into food plantations, so that the people who have been the victims of those plantations can now rise up, they and their children, grandchildren, eat healthy foods and become healthy and strong. If we Barbadians don't do this, our future is very limited.
Sugar
our great future
is
on
killing
our
us.
health. So, a food plantation culture in Barbados, no.
No. Sugar is killing us. This has been CBC Presents, a conversation about sugar in the Barbadian society. Thank you all for joining us here on the program. And thank you, guests, for joining me here, especially at this late hour. I wish you a very productive week, and to Christians watching, continue to have a blessed Holy Week. Good evening. I am Kenneth Connell.